and welcome to this week's edition of NCompass Live. I am your host, Krista Porter, here at the Nebraska Library Commission. NCompass Live is the Commission's weekly webinar series where we cover a variety of topics that may be of interest to libraries. We broadcast the show live every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time. But if you're unable to join us on Wednesdays, that's fine. We do record the show as we are doing today, and it will be posted to our show archives later for you to watch at your convenience. Both the live show and the recordings are free and open to anyone to watch. So please do share with anyone you think might be interested in any of the shows that we have on NCompass Live. For those of you not from Nebraska, the Nebraska Library Commission is the state agency for libraries. So we provide training, databases, grants, all sorts of things to all sorts of libraries in the state. Consulting, anything that they might need, tech kits, tech support from Amanda, for example. So you will find shows on NCompass Live for all types of libraries: public, academic, K-12, corrections, museums, historical societies. Really, our only criteria is that it's something to do with libraries. We bring in guest speakers to talk, to speak on NCompass, to present on NCompass Live sometimes from all across the country. But we also have our own Nebraska Library Commission staff that do presentations for us. And that is what we have today. Today is, it's things sneak up on us fast, but it's the end of September already. Wow. And that means it is the last Wednesday of the month. So it is Pretty Sweet Tech Day. Yay. That is when Amanda Sweet, who is with us, Amanda Sweet is our technology innovation librarian here at the Nebraska Library Commission. And she comes on almost every last Wednesday of the month to talk about something techie related. We have tech related sessions at other times during the months as well, but you can always depend on Amanda being here at the end of the month.
Except for next month.
Except for next month, which if you're looking at this intro slides that we had going, she's taking the month off. We have October is always a different-ish month for us here as well. We usually have our annual Nebraska Library Association, our state annual conference. We take that week off totally, and because of Amanda's actually going to be the next week at participating in, I don't know, Internet Librarian.
Yep. It's virtual, but I'll be moderating a session and then giving 3 sessions, I think.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So she's gonna be busy. That's the last week of October. So it will not be Amanda joining us, but we will have another session on that day. We have. I've got to get the info for that, but we have it scheduled. Yeah. But today Amanda is here. We are all here, and we are going to be talking about data centers. We've all heard a lot about them. I have heard a lot about them. I kind of half know what they're all about. Yeah. I believe there's one being built right now. Google is working on building one here in Lincoln.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. And I am very interested in learning more about exactly what it is, because I actually have 2 friends so far that are going to be working there. Well, that already are working for Google. I think one of them is on site here already, maybe, and the other one is commuting up to Council Bluffs for training before this one opens up. So I've got 2 friends that are actually going to be working there, and I kind of don't exactly know what they do.
Nobody does.
So I'm very interested to see, to learn a little bit more about what's going on with these data centers, and what my friends are doing, and what libraries might have to do with libraries. So I will hand it over to you. Take it away, Amanda.
True. So we all know that AI has been kind of taking over the airwaves, and it's been kind of the hot topic of the day. But not enough people are talking about data centers, because we actually need data centers for AI to function. And just to get this part out of the way, I'll talk about this in a second, but the biggest confusion is what a data center actually is. And so whenever you open up your Gmail and you have all of your emails stored, it seems like that information just comes out of the ether, but it actually has to be saved somewhere. So a data center is actually a physical room that's just filled with tons of different servers and all of the IT infrastructure that's required to make our systems run. So anytime you send something over the cloud, it's actually getting sent over through a data center. And most data centers, because there's so much information flowing through, most of our information is actually backed up in multiple different places. So data centers believe in redundancy. If your information is stored in one spot, it's probably backed up halfway across the country and sometimes halfway around the world. And some places will actually back it up 2, 3, 4 times just to make sure that if one data center happens to go down for any reason, your information isn't completely lost, because that company would lose a whole lot of money if that were to go down. And so everything that we do, even Alexa, if you have a smart thermostat, it all powers through data centers. And there's different kinds of data centers, which is also really important to know about, because data centers kind of evolved over time. And some of the first ones were actually only on universities and military complexes. So if you ever saw that Benedict Cumberbatch movie where he was trying to tackle AI to be able to help in the World War, then yeah, and I think that was World War II.
Yeah, it would have been 2, yeah.
And so that was actually kind of one of the early versions of a data center, when one computer actually took up the entire room. And over time that evolved into, as the technology got better, then those computers were able to be put into businesses, and then that turned into enterprise data centers. And enterprise data centers are when an individual organization has all of the servers and equipment on site and it's managed on site. And then over time that evolved into what's called co-location. So co-location is one big data center where a bunch of different businesses basically rent out space, but they still manage their own services. The hardware and everything is just housed there. But then that evolved into managed co-location, where you can basically get the hardware and all the access to the tech that's built into a giant data center, but then you can outsource it so that that information is managed for you. And then that kind of evolved alongside the cloud. When the cloud happened, this is when data centers started to blow up even more, because everyone wanted to store their information on Google Drive, they wanted on OneDrive, they wanted on everything. And then the cloud evolved into hyperscale cloud. So hyperscale is what everyone is actually going crazy about. And hyperscale is like those giant data centers, like the one that's being built over here. And the biggest one in Nebraska right now is actually by Meta, and that's over by, I think it's in Papillion.
Yes,
But
yeah.
So in this, we're actually you just learned a little bit about what a data center actually is. But then, as you were talking about, you have a couple of friends that are actually going to be working in the data center. Is it the one here?
Yeah, in Lincoln.
Cool.
Yep.
So I'll talk about how
once it's open. It's under construction right now still, so it's not actually open, the one here.
The last I heard is that it was supposed to be operational by fall of 2025, but every construction project always gives a season instead of a month, and they do it for a reason. So I'll talk about the reason that all these states are going crazy to try to get these data centers here they want more jobs, and they want to be able to get the tax revenue and everything that comes with it. So I'll talk about some of the incentives about why data centers are all the hot rage and for a lot of the big cities and little cities. I'll talk about that a little bit more too. And then I'll talk about some of the downsides to it and why there's a lot of pushback going on for the communities that learn more about data centers and how they work, or they already have some that are built in the area and they started to feel the impact. And I'll talk about some of the environmental and infrastructure impacts that can go along with data centers. Because if I learned that this is actually a really variable thing. There is no one size fits all that says all data centers are terrible or all data centers are amazing. It's more the decisions about the design that are made and how it works, and the different innovations that are being built to offset some of these environmental and infrastructure impacts. So these innovations are going to be rolled into talking about the actual issues that are coming up. And then I'll talk about how you can use some of the resources and all this stuff to bring information back to your community, including this handy slide deck.
Yes, these slides will be available afterwards with the archived recording, in case anyone's wondering. Yes.
All right, so we talked about this already. You can click over to this IBM Think link and read the whole article that digs deep into how data centers work and all the different nuances. So you can head on over there if you want to dig deeper. But for now, we're mostly going to focus on the hyperscale, because hyperscale and co-location actually make up the vast majority of data centers that are out there right now. And it was only in the 2000s to the 2010s that all this stuff actually started to blow up. So if you look at the timeline and history of data centers, in 2018 there were maybe only 1,000 of them, and today this is a map of the co-location and cloud data centers now. So when you open up the actual data center map, you'll see that I zoomed in on just the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this for a reason. If you use your right click, like people tend to do on maps,
Mm-hmm.
this thing's gonna go crazy on you. You're gonna turn the world upside down.
Interesting.
So,
The way it's.
So you actually want to use your left click mouse on this one to navigate. And when you zoom out, you can start to get a feel for how
Hawaii and Alaska, nice.
right? Yeah. But the highest concentration of data centers right now is actually in Virginia. So there's 638 data centers. And because Virginia started to turn into basically the US's biggest market for data centers, they also turned into kind of a testing zone. So this is sort of how communities found out what to do and what not to do in terms of data center design, and in terms of where data centers should actually build and how to update and upgrade your city's policies, mostly zoning policies, to be able to make sure that these data centers aren't being built too close to a residence and too close to to schools or anything like that. And I'll go more into detail about that when we dig deeper into the infrastructure and environment, but keep this map in your mind.
I see they gave it as we've got like Silicon Valley and whatnot, Data Center Alley in Ashburn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Texas and California are the second and third biggest markets. And Texas, they actually had, back in 2021, they had a series of rolling blackouts because the data centers were contributing to an overload on the grid. You may have actually read about that when it hit the headlines nationwide back in 2021.
Mm.
So this is a helpful tool for you to be able to wrap your head around where data centers actually are. And these are actually global. So if you explore the map, you'll see that there's also a heavy concentration across Europe everywhere. And China is actually one of the leading markets for data centers right now. And if you read all of the stuff that's coming out about the AI challenge to make the US kind of the AI superpower, a lot of that conversation says that we're competing against China as one of our main competitors. I've always been a co-op game player. I prefer to get along with other countries and everyone instead of competing against them. And in the long run, we're all in the same world, so we're all kind of working together. So you can call it a competition, you can call it whatever you want, but China's another one of the big main players, and I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on that one. So you can play around with this map. It's kind of a fun tool to use. And right now, these...
Interesting that also Illinois, it looks like, is the next one that out of all the states that...
Yeah, Chicago is actually one of the central... It's where a lot of them started, and then they kind of branched out along the suburbs.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
And this 4,049 data centers only applies to co-location and cloud data centers. You're going to see some other numbers later in here that are larger than this, and it's because it takes into account some of the other types of data centers. And let me jump over here. So these are some of the nationwide investments that are happening both in the US and globally. So there's a magnificent 7 in companies. The 2 that are not on here are Apple and I'm trying to remember if he filed under Tesla or XAI. I think in the Magnificent 7 it's listed under Tesla, but those 2 are not on there because they weren't in the TechCrunch article that I pulled this from. And I don't think they had announced the amount of investments that they were going to put in, so they didn't make it on the slide, but they're there. And so the most notable project on here right now is the Stargate project. And OpenAI actually announced this back in early to mid-January of this year. This has actually been planned and in the works for years now already. They started construction in Abilene, Texas, and some of the data centers over there. So if anyone tells you that it just started right now, that's not true. It's been in the works, construction's been happening, and in order to make a project and a collaboration this big, it doesn't happen overnight. So this planning's been happening for years. And so this is under the umbrella of OpenAI, but it's a collaboration across Microsoft, Oracle, and several other key players. If you Google Stargate project, you'll see a hot mess of stuff pop up. Just know that it's been in the works for a while.
And it has absolutely nothing to do with wormholes?
Not that I know of.
Not that they would ever tell us. Yes.
Good show though. Good show.
I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind, but that's the nerd.
I saw it and I was like, did they have to call it Stargate?
Really? Yes. Did they not realize that it's going to have other? Yeah. I was like, they either love the show or never saw it, and I'm betting they probably loved it. But, So this is where all the crazy's coming into play, because people will see all this amount of money and they know that some of the richest companies in the world are funneling all this money and investment toward it. And now communities are just losing their minds saying that we need to get a piece of this.
And then as I started to dig deeper into this, I started to ask myself, maybe think twice before you ask to try to get a piece out of this. But let me jump over here and say the major reason that most of these towns, they cite job creation as the #1 reason that they want to bring a data center to town. And when I dug into the actual data behind it, most of the jobs show up during the construction phase. For most of these mid-sized data centers, it takes about 12 months to 18 or 18 to 24 months on the mid-range. And if they use a modular design where they basically truck in most of the component parts and just assemble it, it can take as little as maybe a year to assemble. And so those are the small to large scale co-location facilities. And these are the vast majority of ones that are being built. So most of the jobs are coming in during construction. And then the job number drops down significantly for daily operation. When I pulled the numbers, the best data that I could find was a range between 1,200 and 1,500 jobs during construction, and the 1,500 was at peak season. And this was from a report that was written up by a group out of Virginia. And then I found some other resources that all cited within this approximate range. And so after that 12 to 18 month mark, it actually drops down to daily operations, and the mid-size locations, the small to mid-size locations can operate with as few as 11 people, and the larger locations could operate with approximately 100 plus people. So what we actually get for the daily operations looks more like this. The one, when I read the source information for the new facility, that's the Google facility that's being built here, the mayor cited 30 jobs being created. So
35 in the of actual staff that will be there.
Yeah.
After the construction's done.
Yeah. And so that is the daily operations. That would be it takes way more than 30 people to build the thing. But yeah, but the daily operations is only about 30. So right now, most of the states are building out tax incentives that they're still trying to figure out the best way to be able to build the tax incentives and build the policy around data centers so that it's beneficial to both the data center and the community. And one of the things that they found out is that here in Nebraska, they mostly use a sales and use tax exemption. And so there is a time limit currently on the sales and use tax exemption for the materials and all of the stuff that is purchased to make that data center run. And so that is the incentive for the data center to build here. Some of the other states are also adding in and tying in the number of jobs that are created long-term to be able to qualify a data center to receive that tax exemption. And in Nebraska, it's like, I don't remember the exact number, but it was relatively low. I think it was only about 10 jobs. In other states, it can be as high as 30 or 50 jobs. So that may have changed since the last time I looked at it. I linked over to the actual legislation so you can read through it and see the most updated version of it. But every single state has been fiddling around with what that looks like. And just in 2023, they tried to pass new legislation that would basically make it did not pass. Put it this way, it did not pass. But I'll link over to the discussion that happened in that legislation so you can know what to look out for and try to start tracking the legislation that's surrounding all of this stuff. so that you know what could be coming down the pipeline. And the other thing that is happening is that there's this job creation that's direct, but most of the data centers are also citing the job creation that happens as kind of a indirect jobs. So in order for these data centers to exist, we also need to be able to expand our energy infrastructure, because as you're about to find out, data centers take a lot of energy. And that means that most cities actually have to build out or expand their power grid or be able to tie in additional sources. So it expands the jobs that's going in the energy, and it also expands some of the jobs that goes into water filtration and water treatment. So it's one of these that this is one of those I couldn't find great data for. And it's because everyone says something different. Some of them were saying that for every one job that's created in a data center, there's an additional 4, but no one can agree on the exact number of jobs that are created by a data center. Is that ratio going by the number of jobs during construction or the number of jobs that are during daily operation? Because if it's a 4-to-1 ratio during construction, that is a massive number of jobs. But if it's a 4-to-1 ratio from during daily operation, that's a much smaller number.
Yeah.
And reasonably, I would say that it's probably the 4-to-1 ratio for the daily operation, because that daily operation number is also the number that most communities use to determine whether these data centers are eligible for the state and tax use exemptions. So that would be my bet. But this is a very fluid number. This is one of the things that is cited by most data centers and most cities as being the biggest pull, but there's nuance to it. So cities have to look a great deal about what this actually looks like, and then they have to look at whether their cities are getting the full property taxes, and these, we already know that some of the cities aren't getting the state and use taxes because of those exemptions. It may kick in later when that exemption runs out, but the biggest thing is cities are looking at property taxes, because even though the daily operation doesn't take a lot of people to run it, it does take a lot of physical space. Some of these facilities can be 250,000 to 1,000,000 square feet in size, and it takes a whole lot of area. And that also means a whole lot of property taxes. But depending on your state's policies, there can be a property tax exemption or a tax break. And some of them will also tie this into how the data center is used. If the data center is used to support a struggling industry, or a data center is used to offset the cost of manufacturing, then you can start to kind of play around with that to be able to become exempt for different types of taxes. So it's questions that you need to ask before you say whether this is a good or a bad thing for your community. And the last thing in here is the capital investments is mostly from the supplies and materials that the data center has to purchase in order to get up and running. The vast majority of the IT equipment, they're probably going to purchase out of state, because most states don't develop things like servers or server racks or any of that in state.
Yeah.
Some of the data centers are going to have preferred vendors that they already know that they work, so they're just going to go add to cart from what they already use. And some of them most of it is going to be from construction materials. And some of that material is going to be imported from out of state, just because there's already a workflow and there's already materials. Like Virginia, since they were one of the first states that actually did it, they started manufacturing a lot of the steel that's being used in data centers across the nation. So if there may be a certain radius where that is the preferred lender or the preferred vendor, but we have to start asking that if we're going to be saying capital investments is one of the reasons that we want this data center here, we don't want to say check the box and say let's go build here before we start asking how many materials are actually going to be sourced locally. Do you have these preferred vendors that you already use? Which materials do we know
that are not local? Yeah.
And there's no way these data centers can come in and just automatically know everything that we can make locally, in state, or regionally. So it helps if we actually have a list on hand that says, here's where you can get the steel, here's where you can get glass, here's where you can get all this different stuff, so that you have better negotiating power during the contract phase to say, this is where you can source these materials. Otherwise, it's easier for them to just go by what they used when they built another site. And that's not just true for data centers, that's true for pretty much anybody. Yeah. You go by what you know. And so we talked about the caveats to the jobs, but there's also the talent sourcing side. Depending on, like here in Lincoln, Omaha, we have kind of a heavy concentration of people who are techie. We have like a tech, we call it Silicon Prairie.
Silicon Prairie, yeah. I was going to say, we have a term for our area, yeah.
So there's still a talent shortage, but we have techie people. So that's one of the things that the data centers are looking for is, can we actually hire people locally? And in many reported cases, the data centers, when it was not in the contract, they wind up outsourcing some of the highly specialized technical jobs. So even though the job is created, there's not always a guarantee that that position will be sourced locally. So when the talent is available and the training is available, the hiring will be local. But if there is this is especially true in the rural areas where more and more of these are being built out, is there's sometimes a shortage of, it's easier to source the jobs that are for cleaning, maintenance, running HVAC, and different things like that. When it gets to server maintenance, networking, and some of the super techie jobs, that's when it actually gets harder to source, because the technology that powers all of this stuff is continually evolving. And they're looking for specialized skill sets in some cases. So this is one of the things that would need to be asked during the public hearing or design process, so that you know that these jobs are actually going to come from your community, because that's the reason that you agreed to build it, because you want local jobs.
Yeah, I can tell you for the Lincoln one, for the two people that I know are actually both of those situations, which is kind of interesting that you mentioned the two different types of things, like the support people, maintenance, whatnot, and then the actual computer geeks. One of the people I know is actually been hired for security, actually, to be a security. They're very big into security, about getting in another building and having your ID and whatnot. And the other person was hired for being one of the computer tech people. Like I said, I don't know a lot about it, but that person is getting a lot of training. He's talking to us about it all the time. So he does have some previous computer type job experience, so he did have some, but he says they are most of it, like right now, the one here isn't even open. He's doing training, and he's been doing it for months. It's a long process. So they really do, they will train you. If you don't know anything, they will, or even know the very little bit of it, they are all about getting you up to speed on it. So
and that's the other thing, is that
they are both local. Yeah.
The other thing that I ran into is the organization that is building the data center will have a big impact on what that training looks like. The Googles and the Metas and the Microsofts and the Amazons of the world, they have really good established training programs. And we all know that Google's all about training education,
Yeah.
but not all of the data centers have that. There are some of the, I won't name names, but it's, yeah, I've run into quite a few issues that communities have had about not being able to source jobs locally. And that's not as much of a problem with the Magnificent Seven because they have more training opportunities. Like Google, I'm not worried about it. They train. And so let's dig into, I went over enough about this and I want to get to the rest of this, but after each one of these sections, I added in the recap questions that you will actually want to ask your community and ask the actual data center reps if they are available. And the other thing that I run into is that by the time you find out a data center is actually going to be built in your town, there is a high likelihood that the local government and heads of key agencies have already been talking about it and planning it potentially for years before the public actually ever hears about it. Here in Lincoln, an article just came out in early 2025 that the mayor had actually been, it had been behind closed doors for 4 years and in discussion for 4 years before the public actually was able to hear about it. They had to give it a code name called Project Agate, and they weren't allowed, and all of the zoning and all of the applications for permits, they all went through a pseudonym. So they weren't allowed to actually put the Google name on any of the applications until it was publicly announced. So
until they were sure it was going to be a done deal. Yeah.
yeah. So, and they had to sort through, there's a hot mess of different details that goes into actually planning and building this out. So by the time we, the public, actually hear about this, a lot of times it's halfway, almost a done deal. There is some input that the public has, and in some cases, the public is able to actually make a case to put the kibosh on the whole thing. But so it varies. And in some cases, like now they're trying to reduce the regulation and speed up the processing time that it takes to get a data center pushed through. So there was just a Wired article that came out about in Louisiana, Meta was making a deal with the state of Louisiana to be able to build a data center there, and the state wanted to help fast track it so that Meta didn't decide to go to a different location. And they kept citing that they wanted to make a decision quickly because they needed to operate at the speed of business to be able to ensure that the data center chose their town over another one. And they wound up in the Wired article, I'll link over to it so you can actually read through what happened there. But some of the negotiation that the public requested didn't actually wind up happening. And the public hearing window between when that hearing happened and the actual decision was super short. So they basically just pushed it through, and now some of the job creation and job training and zoning and all of that different stuff, some of that conversation either didn't happen or never came up on the docket in the first place. So read that article. Like I'll have a link to all the articles that I read to actually put this stuff together. And I've been tracking this for a while because I've been tracking AI for a while. So some of the reduced regulation, I feel, is going to have an impact on some of the decision-making processes. And there's just too much pressure on communities to be able to win a bid that might turn around to bite them. So, hey, what do you know? This is the slide that might turn around to bite you. So these are some of the environmental and infrastructure impacts that can happen with a data center. I had some fun making this slide, and I use fun as a relative term, but but I grabbed Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you can see that I even left the icons there just for fun. But I call this the data center hierarchy of needs. This is what a data center actually needs to survive. And because the data center is actually pulling the resources that we as a community use, this is actually what's been causing a lot of issues. The biggest foundational problem is energy demand. And
the one that many people are.
Yeah, this is what caused the rolling blackouts in Texas. It is actually surprisingly difficult to project out the exact amount of energy a data center is going to require to sustain itself. And that's because the technology that's powering AI is continually evolving. So what the data centers that many of us are used to were primarily used for cloud storage and cloud retrieval, and in some cases for requesting information from Alexa. And that actually takes considerably less computing power than artificial intelligence. Because artificial intelligence, there's a training period, and the training period is what's used to build the AI models that run everything that we use. And I'm trying not to use too much jargon in here. I need to write kind of a little summary book that avoids the jargon, but that still describes it. But what's most important to know is that as AI evolves, it's going to take more energy to be able to sustain it in the data center on the back end. So that's why it's difficult. That's one of the reasons that it's difficult to guesstimate how much energy this is going to suck up over time. And the next thing is water. The water is primarily used for cooling, because I talked about the IT infrastructure and the services, but there's a whole lot of water that can be used to be able to cool down and prevent these servers from overheating. And in my little computer, a little fan that's whirring all the time so that it doesn't run out, so that it doesn't go out. And I need to change my speaker output because I bumped that wire again. There we go. And I have a whole slide. We'll dig deeper into this. And then the next one is actually noise and light pollution. And I'll talk about some of the causes and how it can deal with that. The top two are view sheds. If you don't know what a view shed is, it's when you look out at the landscape, we want everything to look pretty and awesome. But the view shed is basically the visual appeal of a landscape when you look out. And these buildings are giant, they're massive, and they're industrial looking and kind of ugly. So if you're used to looking out at an open landscape and you have all this different farmland, it looks amazing, there's greenery, and now in the middle of it, there's a giant, massive, gray looking building. So that is the view shed. And I dug deeper into energy, water, and noise and light pollution than I did into view sheds and e-waste, because these bottom three are what actually impact the local community the most. And there's really not a whole lot that we can do as a public to make a building look less fugly. So I didn't really do too much with that. Like maybe they can change it to change the design of the building itself so that it's more architecturally awesome looking, or maybe they can start like painting it, add a mural or something. But I didn't dig that much into it. And the e-waste comes in because the average life cycle of a server is about 3 to 5 years on average, and there's some times where they can extend it out into about 10 years. But most of the higher end data centers are going to go for that 3 to 5 year data cycle because they don't, or 3 to 5 year cycle, because they don't want to run the risk of any of this stuff running out. And all of that turns into some flavor of e-waste. And most of this actually winds up in landfills. And in early days of computing, it wound up in our landfills here in the States. But then over time, they started making these e-waste recycling facilities, and there's actually hazardous waste and toxic metals and all this different stuff, because there's a lot of precious metals that actually go into building all of this stuff. So we can actually reduce our impact on the environment by pulling out and extracting those precious metals for reuse instead of just chucking in the garbage.
So it can be recycled rather than just tossed.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it's like, it would basically be like tossing out a giant nugget of gold if you were to just toss out a server and not do anything with it. But that's actually sometimes just what happens. People don't think about the materials that go into the computers that we use every day. But now they actually tracked it and found out that a lot of this e-waste, we didn't want to see it in the States. So it just, for a while, it just disappeared from our view. We didn't think about it until there was a guy who added a bunch of GPS trackers to some of the computers that he was going to toss out. He took them over to really popular e-waste recycling centers, and then he tracked the GPS trackers that he added into all these computers, and he found out that a lot of them were going to Hong Kong. Some of them, well, many of them were going overseas to underdeveloped countries. And then he actually flew over to Hong Kong and he found this giant landfill with all these workers that were extracting the metals from the old servers and old processors. And it's actually not in the server itself, it's in the chips, the microchips that are in there. But he walked through this facility and he saw just broken LED tubes that have mercury in them, and none of the workers were wearing masks or any protective equipment. And this article came out in 2016, and I haven't been able to find updated information except a documentary based on that article that came out in 2021. So this is something that is a thing to think about, but it doesn't have a direct impact on local community because it gets shipped overseas. But okay, so digging deeper into the energy demand, I said that these take a lot of energy. But in 2018, there were 1,000 data centers nationwide, if you think about that little map that I had pulled up before. And those databases or data centers collectively took 11 gigawatts in 2018. This was at kind of like when the cloud started coming out. Google was starting to get popular with Google Drive and all that stuff. But by 2023, when the cloud exploded and everybody wanted it, Amazon, like Alexa was starting to get more popular, and all these different services were starting to explode. These 1,000 data centers turned into over 5,400 data centers, and now they're using 176 terawatts. and a terawatt is 1,000 gigawatts. And then it's projected, Berkeley did this awesome study where they were trying to project what the water and energy draw would be upwards of 2030. So nationwide, this is the anticipated amount. But we don't know how many data centers there's going to be, and we don't know what the energy draw from AI is going to be with technology that's still being developed. So what Berkeley wound up doing was actually building out a range that goes from low end to high end and sharing the different variables that go into that calculation. So the low end of it is 325 terawatts and the high end is 580. And I linked over to the actual report that has some really cool little graphs on there that you might want to check out. And if you sift through the whole report, it gives you more than you ever wanted to know about how these numbers came about. And so this is why people are freaking out, because as I said, it's the hyperscale data centers that actually bring the most revenue, the most property tax revenue, and bring the most jobs to the communities. And it's the hyperscale data centers that most of those Magnificent Seven actually want to build. And it's where all these investments are going in, and it's the hot thing that's going on. And some are actually even calling them mega scale data centers when they're getting even bigger than what they were before. So a single data center can take anywhere from 20 to 100 plus megawatts. And a megawatt is 100 megawatts is a gigawatt. 100 or 1,000. I can double check it. But so the data center here is it's closer to the 20 megawatt range. And the 20 megawatt range is the report that came out of the Lincoln Electric was that the energy that is required to power the Google data center would be the equivalent of powering 15,000 residential homes in Lincoln. So that's what the report out of Lincoln said. And the other reports that I checked were similar to that. But the really, 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 really big ones that go up to 100 plus, if you extrapolate that out, how many residential homes could be powered by the giant, massive ones? And are our communities actually used to scaling out our power grid at that rate? Because if you look at the average population growth in the city of Lincoln, we just reached over 300,000 people last year. And there's an average of between 2 to 3% population growth. And this 20 megawatt would be the equivalent of a 5% population growth. So now, in order to support the power grid, actually has to support growth in businesses, growth in residential, and growth in, and they have to account for population growth. So they need to upgrade their infrastructure to support the customers that they have right now. And then they're being asked to support new businesses in an entrepreneurial drive, because in order to grow the economy, businesses need to be able to hook into the grid. And over in Omaha, they had a backup of at least 11 businesses that were trying to get onto the grid, but still couldn't, because the grid couldn't scale to be able to accommodate those needs. So when we prioritize a data center to be connected, instead of more residences or more businesses, there's a cost benefit analysis. Is the number of jobs created by a data center, does that outweigh the number of jobs that would be created by the other businesses, whether they're startups or not, which would actually create more jobs using the same amount of energy? And then I dug a little deeper to find out what percentage, where this energy is actually being used. Because I said that how the data center is actually designed will determine the amount of energy that's actually used. The vast majority of it goes towards cooling, but there's also different methods of cooling. There is air cooling, there is the traditional water cooling, which is what the vast majority of the data centers use right now, but there's also liquid cooling. And liquid cooling is basically kind of a chemical reaction that goes directly to the chip and into the server to be able to cool it down. And they're improving the technology for liquid cooling and starting to explore water-free cooling to be able to reduce the impact of, I didn't even get to water yet, did I? You know, this same number is going to affect water too. Spoiler alert. But so most of this is actually from the energy is to power the equipment and to power the cooling equipment and to power and to run the operations, the lights for security, backup generator, and all that. So you need power to run the thing and power to cool the thing.
Yeah.
And then
I did look up, since you're asking about it, that yes, 1,000 megawatts is 1 gigawatt. So
I should have known it was all in increments of 1,000 because it's 1,000 gigawatts to a terawatt. So it would be 1,000 megawatts to a gigawatt. I said it and I was like, it has to be 1,000. So what the energy companies are looking at right now is, where does this energy come from? Right now, 56% of data centers use fossil fuels to power their data centers. This is the natural gas, coal, petroleum. It's what most of us are used to when we look at the power, we'll look out the power lines. But more of these data centers in the last 4 to however many years, they were looking more at renewables. So the data center over in Papillion that's powered by Meta actually used a green energy credit to be, they actually call it a tariff, but there's different kinds of tariffs. The green energy tariff, the way that it works is that Meta was able to work to designate a specific wind farm that's out in northeast Nebraska, the Rattlesnake Wind Farm. And they were able to designate that wind farm as being the primary source of energy for the Meta data center. So they wound up taking they took the vast majority of energy output from the Rattlesnake Wind Farm, and then any remaining energy would go to the residences, businesses, anyone else connected to the grid. The problem with that is that Meta can't just take a really long cord and plug into the wind farm. Like, that's not how it works. They actually have to, they partnered with the Omaha Public Power District, and the Omaha Public Power District takes the transmission line and they connect the Rattlesnake Wind Farm into the grid. And then all of that energy basically gets stirred into one big pot. So when data centers say that they are powered by 100% renewable energy, that's only technically true. Most of it is that their energy is offset by renewable energy. And so that's why we want renewables to be in the mix, because without renewables, we won't actually be able to expand out to meet the energy supply. And this is the problem that they're having in Virginia right now, because Virginia, they're anticipating that the number of data centers is going to continue to grow. So they wrote this this giant report that's both in a PowerPoint slide and a massive written report stating how they're going to diversify their energy portfolio to be able to meet this demand. These numbers are actually nationwide, but each different community has a different ratio. In Omaha, they use kind of a similar combination, but they use more biofuels and bioenergy than nuclear. And I don't actually know that nuclear is even in the mix at all in Omaha. I have to double check my stat. I don't think nuclear is even in the mix in Omaha.
Not that I've heard that we have anything like that going on here now.
But so these are nationwide, but you actually have to check your local stats to find out how many renewables are in the mix for your community. Over in Europe, it can be almost 50% of the 50% that's powered by solar and wind. And in China, they have some of the biggest wind farms in the world. So they have a greater percentage that's actually being pulled from wind and solar. And over in, I love some of the stuff that they're doing over in Europe and some of the, like, they're doing some awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But they're looking.
I also like when we drive east. I love going through Iowa and seeing all the wind farms in Iowa.
Right,
Iowa's
yeah.
got so many, yeah.
And so we're trying to get more of these going toward renewables just because of the amount of CO2 and the water usage that goes into fossil fuels.
Yeah, it's the only way to survive is going to be doing it that way. Yeah.
Pretty much. And I'm about to talk about the water usage that actually goes into data centers, but it also comes from fossil fuels too, because in order to turn gas into a fuel, they actually boil they boil like a whole hot mess of water, and then they superheat the natural gas. And when the superheated natural gas boils the water, it turns a turbine which generates the electricity. So there's actually a considerable amount of water use that actually goes into generating fossil fuels. So since 56% of the data centers are using fossil fuels, you're actually doubling down on water too. So the water usage, and I'll skip through some of these. I can go back to them later if you want, but the water consumption actually grew alongside the energy consumption. So a typical, like the nationwide data centers as a whole use 30 billion liters just for 1,000 data centers. Now we're closer to 66 billion liters. And in the near future, we're going to be up to 145 to 280 billion liters. So we're going to be hitting with a double whammy because we have water that's coming from here and water that's actually going to the cooling and to making all this stuff run.
Someone did comment about there's the Cooper Nuclear Station in Brownville, which is south and of Omaha and even farther south in Lincoln, but that could possibly something that Omaha or Lincoln could even tap into if they can connect into that. That's the only one that we do have here in Nebraska. So there is one. Yeah. And I also just want to mention we are a little after 11 o'clock. And we did start a little after 10 o'clock. So I'm not sure how many slides Amanda has left, but
I'll skip some of these because I went into more detail than I probably could have on some of them. But I'll show you.
Going until Amanda finishes up everything she wants to do. And if anybody has any questions or comments or anything you want to share, type into that question section. Yep. But if you do have to take off because you only allotted an hour for the show, that's fine. We're recording and you can always watch the rest of it later in the archives.
And so each one of these, I put together a slide that talks about the major innovations that are helping to solve some of these problems. So nuclear energy, one of the things that I've been looking at is microreactors. So a lot of the Meta, Google, and Microsoft have been looking at building micro reactors that would be located on site so that the data center would be pulling their energy from that micro reactor instead of pulling from the larger power grid that is in the nearby community. And there's also both large and micro reactors that can be plugged into the grid in a community like Lincoln or Nebraska. Like, it doesn't have to be a nuclear power plant like we all think about with Homer Simpson and The Simpsons. Like, there's other ways to do it. And expanding out the renewable energy has been one of the big things, because many of the solar and wind farms have been kind of paused or shut down recently. One of the things that I'm not going to go that deep into that, because I'm sure that a lot of that is going to change and evolve over time. But one of the things that they're looking at is they're looking at the impact of wind farms on wildlife, because there are a lot of birds that wind up flying through a turbine because it moves so fast that it looks like a blur that the bird can just fly through. So one of the innovations they've tried, and that has actually worked, is that if they paint a single blade of the turbine, if they paint a single blade black, then when that turbine flows that fast, it actually appears as a solid object to the bird, so that the bird doesn't think that it can actually pass through it. And the studies that they've done so far, that has reduced injury or death to wildlife by 72%. So yeah, so the communities that have had the pushback because the wildlife has been injured or killed, a lot of that can be offset by painting a single blade black. But how many communities know that that innovation exists, that they would be able to advocate for it? Because some of the communities are just saying, we don't want the wind farms, but they don't always know that there are ways that they can offset some of the damages that wind turbines can cause. And this is the traditional design of a turbine, but there's also other designs. If you just Google innovative wind turbine designs, you'll find a whole hot mess of them. And they're also changing the materials that some of this stuff is made out of, so that it's more cost effective, it's more lightweight, it's more sustainable. And so yeah, like, there's innovations to data centers, but there's also innovations to renewables.
Mm-hmm.
And all this stuff is going to be churning and chugging along. So you can read through some of these different innovations that are going on. One of the best things that you can do is start just searching out some of these keywords, like the hydrogen fuel cells and using on-site power. I'll have a hot mess of different links that you can use, and there's stuff. And these are the series of questions that you'll want to start asking about energy. And a lot of it is going to boil down to the cooling method and looking at the energy portfolio, what actually powers your grid and what's the plan for expansion. Does it actually include renewables? And what are we doing about all this stuff? For the sake of time, I already jumped over how much water is actually being used. It is a lot. Here in Lincoln, we're actually probably one of the better locations for water usage, because we have a planned $1 billion infrastructure expansion called Water 2.0. They did a water study that said that we'd probably run out of the potable water by 2046 if we didn't do anything about it. So Water 2.0 is adding a secondary water source that syncs up to the Missouri River. So that actually expands out the water supply, which makes Lincoln a more likely location to put all this stuff. but that also opens up the possibility that more data centers are going to try to come in to tap into those natural resources. And that's something that we probably need to look at.
Yeah.
And let me jump on. I talked a little bit about this, about how the water is actually used, and most of it is the fossil fuels and cooling. So this is one thing that you'll want to look at. If your community shows up anywhere on a drought monitor, you probably don't want to be the site of a data center.
You're
And
already in the heavy.
yeah, Nevada is the one that's actually having the biggest problem with that right now, because they started building out a whole bunch of data centers, but then when you look at your drought monitor, I do want to show this though. There's a comparison monitor, there's a comparison slider by the US Drought Monitor, which incidentally is actually powered by UNL, so go UNL.
Nice.
But let's look at the peak of drought season in 2017, right before data centers became all the rage. And then we'll compare it to what it looks like right now. So let's say August 15th, 2017 to August 19th of 2025. This is 2027. And this is
Interesting.
August of this year. So you actually want to look at the peak drought season, because that is one of the most important times that if a data center is going to be pulling resources, then so will droughts. So you want to actually be able to compare against the best and the worst drought times. And if you make sure that you actually have a plan to deal with extreme drought, because statistically in this half of the country, that's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
Especially in this little panel right here. And it's both fun and terrifying to use that slider.
It is, yes.
It really is. Yeah. But you can see how much has changed and how much drought has gotten worse just from 2017 to 2025, and how much the climate has actually changed throughout that time.
There's your climate change. Yep.
Yeah. So I won't go too deep into the rest of this, because just for the sake of time, what I will do is give you a quick overview of some of the things that you should look at, and then we'll wrap up and you can start plopping any questions in if you have them, and I'll stick around and answer them. So the next biggest thing is that when data centers are built too close to a residential area, the server hum and generators, constant fan running, the collective noise gets really, really loud. And on site, it can get up to 96 decibels, which is, it can cause hearing loss if there's no other mitigation. And I don't know, I've never actually been inside of a hyperscale data center, so I don't actually know what it sounds like, and it took some massive digging to actually be able to find this number. And the report out of Virginia came out in 2017, where they measured the decibel level from 400 yards away where there was a residential area. The city ordinances were ranged between 55 and 60 decibels, and the measured range came in at 59, but it was still an approved decibel range because where that reading happened, the city ordinance was a decibel above what was measured. And that report showed a chart that said that that decibel range would be similar to listening to a conversation 3 feet away from you at all times. So it would basically be like trying to sleep while someone's humming really loud about 4 feet away from you. So one of the recommendations that I would have is updating your city ordinances to lower the decibel range so that you don't actually have this issue, and changing the zoning so that one, data centers are classified as an industrial complex instead of a telecommunication building, because telecommunication can usually be built closer to a residential area than industrial, and industrial is required to be built further out. So update the classification of data center, because as you know, historically, they used to be more of a telecommunication, but now they're not. So that is one of the things that is in the innovation section to be able to start updating. And the rest of it is just some design improvements and things like that. And these are some of the questions that you should start asking. And the light pollution is actually primarily from the outdoor security system. And this is more of how the lights are actually placed. So depending on the original design of the security system, if the lights are pointed outward, which if you're in an industrial complex is usually pretty standard, you want to be able to know what's going out in the distance. But if you have a residential area that's within 400 yards, that direct light outward without any barrier shines directly in your window. So the way that they were starting to address that is using the LEED 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 certified system, so that there are, one, the lights are sustainable, two, the lights are designed to be not disruptive to the surrounding community, so that those lights would be pointed downward or pointed in a way that doesn't shine directly into a window. And I put a link to a bunch of different ways that you can address that. But one of the things is the data center actually willing to negotiate with the community? And having the lights on at all times and everything is humming all the time, even though the security system lights may not be shining directly into a window, which is the biggest cause. The second one is that the lights are always on next door and they're really, really bright. So using, instead of having the lights on at all times in every room, using motion activated sensors so that they're only on when you actually need them. That saves power for the data center, and it also drives your neighbors less crazy. And it can also adjust the surrounding wildlife, and the surrounding people are both not used to having 24/7 light.
No.
So it can mess with migration patterns, it can mess with sleep, it can mess with a lot of stuff.
That's what someone mentioned here, that we don't see a lot of the wind farms, wind turbines in like the Grand Island, central Nebraska, because of the sandhill crane migration. That is huge. We were probably in that particular area, even with those mitigation things you talked about, not something that we will probably get there because obviously the crane migration is more important.
Yeah, and some of them, they can actually control the time that the turbines are actually running. So during the peak migration, they can turn them off. But there's also alternative. That's not the only renewable energy source either. There's also solar, geothermal, hydro, but I don't know that that would be the best solution here. But no, there's other alternatives besides just wind. Wind is going to be the solution in some places, and it's not going to be the solution in others.
Yeah.
And so if you want to take a gander at these, I talked about a good chunk of them, and these are the questions you want to start asking. So are there any questions at the moment?
Let's see here. Okay. We didn't have any questions that came in. No. So just thanks, Amanda and Krista. Always a pleasure and learning experience. Yeah, and nobody really had any questions throughout. No, I think it's just a big topic that a lot of people are interested in, especially since the construction is wrapping up, maybe hopefully sometime soon, about our data center here. Yeah.
Fall 2025.
Yeah.
We do
And I
still
know
need.
the one person that is supposed to be working there, they keep telling him, you're gonna be able to work in Lincoln now. Oh wait, nope, still gotta go. We're not ready yet. You gotta still go up to Council Bluffs.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then he says, oh, we get to stop going up there finally. And then, a week later we hear from him, actually, no, I'm still going up there.
And that's the other people. The other problem is some of the job training has been putting people through the program, but then people still need to be able to make a living. So
Yes.
since it's been difficult to sync up when the actual completion date timeline is, they've been losing the staff that they recruited because they need to work.
They're trained, but they don't have any to work yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone does have a question they just typed in, which is a great question. How can libraries educate our communities about these data centers?
That is a great question. One of them is going to be you can host community conversations so that you can bring in the key players like mostly the local mayor who would actually be making this decision. You can bring in the public power, you can bring in the local water, and you can start a conversation about, does everyone actually know what a data center is? Does everyone know what the potential impact is about this? Have you already been approached to potentially build a data center here? Has the local power company gotten a written request from a data center requesting to be connected over to the grid? Because that's usually the first point of contact. Is sometimes a data center will directly reach out to the power company to say, can we get connected? Like Omaha had a line of, I think, 19 of them when I read the report. And yeah, so bringing those people together to start that conversation and also bringing in the public so that the public is involved in that conversation early and often so that you don't have to wait for a public hearing and start preparing for the possibility before the secret negotiations actually start. So the community conversation, bringing in guest speakers to inform people about what this actually looks like, sharing out this slide deck to be able to give a visual representation of what people should actually be looking at, sharing out some of the YouTube videos that are talking about the impacts of all this different stuff.
Yeah, and this is something we
Doing
talk
book
about
club
in
discussions.
when I talk about community needs and responding to your needs in your community, that thinking outside the box. This isn't necessarily, and it may be something that you're wondering, libraries, data centers, do we even use them? No, but they affect your community, and anything that might affect your community, you can be the facilitator for those discussions. Yeah.
And like the library is the purveyor of quality information, and it has been difficult
Trust
to
your
find.
library. Usually people
Yeah.
trust the library to give good, accurate, unbiased information. So you are a good person to provide this, put this information out there. Yeah.
Put a data center LibGuide out there that just puts all the information in one spot.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
And book discussions.
All right. What else you got, Amanda? Or is
And
that, I wasn't
I
sure.
think I'll leave it off there just because we're way over time.
Yeah.
But this is a listing of all the different resources that I use to be able to put this together. And there are, what I'm doing now, there are 59 of them. So since I've been out sick for the last couple days, what I'm doing right now is taking these tabs and categorizing them into a document. And what you can do with this Google Doc is you can either give the resources and summary information to your community directly or use them to be able to connect people with vetted information. Or you can go into a tool like Notebook LM or Perplexity, and you can build a knowledge base. And then you can use AI to actually interact with all 59 of these resources to be able to extract the information that you need. So you can take some of the guiding questions and start interacting with this knowledge hub and basically ask a ChatGPT to give you curated quality information, answers based on these curated resources. So Notebook LM is one of the best tools to be able to do that. Perplexity will let you build out what they call spaces where you can load in these resources and it will pull from these curated resources. Because if you try to ask a ChatGPT or ask any of these tools using the open web, you're going to wind up with a hot mess of answers where a whole bunch of spittle is also thrown into the mix. Because I had to dig hard to actually find some of the reliable information that gives some of the good information instead of just pulling out slop.
Well, thank you, Amanda, for finding and that's what we do as librarians. We find the accurate information for yeah.
So what can the library do? Give curated information that isn't slop.
Yeah.
And then show your community how to use the AI tools that we're trying to build data centers to support and use AI in a good way. So cool.
All right, and do you have a slide with your contact info in this deck, or?
Oh, I am gonna.
Okay. There will be. So yes, if you do want to discuss more, have more information about some of this of what's in here, you can always reach out to Amanda. You all know where to find her here at the commission. Our usual amanda.sweet@nebraska.gov is our standard format for all of us here, and she'd be happy to explain more about some of these issues in the data centers.
And
Canva on the fly.
it's true. Oh, we have Pro. I wonder why that's not. Well, whatever. There, I'll go with that one.
Yeah. All right, and there will be a link to these slides in the archive when I put the archive up. So you'll have all of everything that Amanda talked about and the slides that she didn't specifically get into the details, and her contact info is right there.
And here is a link.
Yes.
And I will close this out.
You can share the link with me or in the chat, whichever way you want to do.
That did not copy a link.
No.
That did.
There we go. Got it. All right. Clicking on it, getting it. There we go. Looks good. I've got the link here. Perfect.
Sweet.
All right. All right. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, everyone, for sticking around with us here. I am going to pull presenter control back to my screen. Do my little quick wrap up here for the show. Is it there? Is it there? Yes. There. So you see here, I've got the link here. It will be included when I do the archive. This is if you use whatever is your search engine of choice and look up search for NCompass Live, you'll find our main page with our upcoming shows. Right here is a link to our archives, most recent ones at the top of the page here. By the end of the day tomorrow at the latest, everyone who attended today's show and registered for today's show will get an email from me letting you know that the recording is ready. You can also just keep your eyes on here if you want to, but I will let you all know directly. We also post to our social media. We have a Facebook page for NCompass Live. If you like to use Facebook, give us a like over there. And I post reminders here. Here's your reminder to log into today's show, announcing today's show, and then here we go, last week's recording available. So we'll do the same thing for this week. We use the hashtags NComp Live for our show, and whenever we have our Pretty Sweet Tech sessions, Pretty Sweet Tech. So you can also use those hashtags to look for anything out on other social media. We also use the Library Commission's Instagram account to share things as well. So as I said, Amanda won't be here at the end of next month, but we do have a session scheduled that I'm still waiting for a full description on. We're going to be talking about our Nebraska celebration of Nebraska books event, our festival. It's Nebraska Book Festival, celebration of Nebraska books. That's on November 15th. So on October 29th, we're going to have an NCompass Live all about that upcoming event. So you can learn all about what's happening at that event. So look for that session to open up. We are off on October 22nd, as I said. It is our state annual conference, Nebraska Library Association conference. So we are off that day. But next week, Tessa Timperley will be here with us. She's our communications coordinator, and possibly some other people from the Nebraska Center for the Book to talk about our Letters About Literature contest, where students can write letters to authors, living or deceased, about their favorite book or how a book or any writing had affected them. So if you are interested in that and want to learn more about our annual competition there, please do sign up for register for that show or any of our upcoming shows. And Amanda will be back at the end of November. November 26th is the next Pretty Sweet Tech. Topic to be determined later. That's a couple of months away. Plenty of time to figure that out.
Probably the Internet Librarian recap.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, absolutely. Since that would have where you were the month before. Sure. All right, so look for that. So thank you, Amanda, so much for sharing all this information. Lots of good info. Very important thing going on in lots of areas. And like I said, right here in Lincoln, it's on top of people's minds possibly. So very good collection of information about it. And thank you everyone for joining us and sticking with us for this extra long session of NCompass Live. Hopefully we'll see you all on a future episode. Bye-bye.